of 8 years and 7 moves, and the Ahern.com blog manager. I'd like for you to meet the brains and muscle behind the success of Ahern.com. These 10 folks are the day-to-day operations, facilitating strategy, user experience, customer support, and marketing. Some have been working at Ahern.com since it launched 10 years ago. In the next 90 minutes, you'll be hearing from Brian Davis, the VP of EasyLandlordForms.com, about the state of the national rental market. Then Brooke Goldberg of National Military Family Association will speak to recent and pending DoD policy changes that are impacting the military community and the supporting housing markets. We will also be speaking to a powerhouse panel of 6 military spouses about the evolving needs of their respective services. And we'll round out today's presentation with NARPM trainer Brian Birdy. As time allows, we will be asking your questions of each speaker. To the right of your screen, you'll find a GoToWebinar dashboard in the gray box. At the bottom, the chat box enables you to submit your questions directly to our team working behind the scenes. For this webinar, if you are calling in to listen, be aware that standard phone rates will apply. Throughout today's presentation, feel free to submit your questions via the chat window, and we'll curate and pose them as time permits. We have a packed presentation today, so we apologize in advance if we aren't able to get to all of the questions. We can do a Q&A and send via email with recording afterwards. Stay all the way with us through to the end, as we have 2 exciting giveaways. 2 one-year subscriptions valued at over $399 total. One from EasyLandlordForms.com and one courtesy of FloorPlanOnline.com. Are you ready? Let's get started. Brian Davis has over 11 years in the real estate investing industry, with experience as a lender, inspector, renovation investor, landlord, and for the last 6 years as the Vice President of EasyLandlordForms.com. Brian, thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm going to turn the stage over to you.
Kristen, thank you so much for having me. Hi everyone, I'm Brian Davis. I'm with EasyLandlordForms.com, and I want to start by talking about the Great Recession and its aftermath, because that's really the context of what's going on today in rental and real estate markets around the country. I'm sure everyone remembers reading about the foreclosure wave, which converted millions of American homeowners into renters from roughly 2007 through 2012. This also flooded the housing market with cheap inventory and caused banks to panic to an extent and tighten their lending standards. If you remember the words credit crunch being thrown around in the media, that's really where that came from. This has gone hand in hand with homeownership rates plummeting. The homeownership rate today is at the lowest level since the mid-90s, as you can see from this graph here. And the causes of this are a whole topic in themselves, but there's been both a cultural shift away from glamorizing homeownership and the tight credit markets that meant that banks are only willing to lend to the most established, credit-worthy homebuyers. Meanwhile, decent jobs have been slowly returning, and gradually the unemployment rate has dropped, leading to more people able to participate in the housing market. But of course, their starting place is renting. So this has led to more people able to move out from their parents' basements or their friends' spare bedrooms, in an effect called household unbundling, which we'll discuss further in a minute, and I'll show you a graph to help show what's been going on. And lastly, millennials have reached their young adult years, which are prime renting years. Millennials are as large of a demographic force as baby boomers, and they've been entering the rental market in large numbers. And in fact, the most common age in America today is 22, followed by 23, then followed by 21. So they really are quite a demographic force in America. So all of what we just discussed has led to a boom in demand for rental housing. Median rents in the first quarter of this year were at an all-time high and are only slightly lower in the second quarter. Likewise, rental vacancy rates are at the lowest they've been in nearly 20 years at 7.5%. And as we touched on a minute ago, the homeownership rate in the second quarter was the lowest it's been since 1996 at 64.7%. So as you can see, there's been a whole influx of demand for rental housing in the U.S. over the last few years. We talked a little bit about the household formation rate a minute or two ago. And in this next slide, you'll see a graph of U.S. households. You can see where the number was flat for several years as people either failed to move out on their own or they moved in together to save money. And then you can see a sudden leap upward starting around the end of 2011 and going through 2012 as people moved back out on their own again. This is what's called the household unbundling effect, where people were artificially living together during the recession and its aftermath. But then they moved back out on their own once incomes and employment have improved. Young adults are also much more likely to rent today rather than buy compared to 6 years ago. There have been numerous studies and surveys showing that millennials' attitudes towards homeownership are far less glossy than their parents' generation. Adults under 35 have a homeownership rate of only 35.9%, compared to the same group 6 years ago in 2008 having a homeownership rate of 41.3%. Now, that being said, the rent growth that we've seen nationwide has largely been driven by just a handful of major cities, such as San Francisco, San Jose, Seattle. In these cities, rent growth has far outpaced income growth, and rents simply can't continue to rise at the rates we've seen over the last 3 to 4 years. And while demand for rental housing is expected to remain strong, supply is starting to outpace it or catch up with it in some places, particularly in the South. With rents having risen so much, developers have started building more and more apartment buildings, which in some markets are starting to outpace demand. And as you can see from this graph here, you can see these two bulges in age groups, the one on the right being baby boomers and the bulge on the left being millennials. So they really are, millennials and boomers really are the two biggest demographic forces affecting the U.S. housing markets today. Now, we could spend an hour talking about what's going on in real estate sales markets, but the super condensed version is that we're seeing market normalization. Prices are still rising, but growth is slowing, and home appreciation is expected to normalize to more historically average rates. Nationwide, home values are still around 17.5% below the peak of the bubble in 2006. That's compared to the market low point in 2012, when values were 35% below their 2006 peaks. First-time home buyers are also down. Lawrence Yun, the chief economist for the National Association of Realtors, explains that typically first-time home buyers account for about 40% of all home sales, but today they account for only 28%, and that has an impact on the net demand for housing for sale, since first-time home buyers aren't also contributing to the supply by selling. And you can see from some of the figures on this graph that home price growth is slowing in 2014 versus the faster growth we saw last year. This graph shows January through May home appreciation for each of those years. Mortgage interest rates have also risen a little in the last year. We haven't seen a whole lot of growth there yet, but that is likely to change over the next 18 months as the Fed is likely to raise interest rates. And when interest rates do rise, home prices will likely plateau for a little while as affordability drops. Supply of housing for sale, inventory, has also been increasing and has contributed to the slowing home price growth. The NAR's data shows a 3.1% increase in housing inventory at the beginning of this year versus the beginning of 2013. That's roughly 5 months worth of inventory versus 4.6 months a year earlier. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, healthy market inventory is about 6.5 months. So all in all, there's been some grumbling among pundits and journalists about the housing sector being soft, but really home prices are just normalizing to where they should be based on average incomes and affordability, historical averages. I think a lot of people have grown to expect unrealistic performance from the housing sector. And at the risk of de-emphasizing everything that I've said so far, I do think it's worth reiterating that national trends are far less important than local ones when it comes to real estate investing and property management businesses. They're great for context, but when you're actually making business decisions on the ground in your city, it's far more important to look at things like local unemployment rates, local wage movement, local housing construction and supply, local population changes. These are all critically important and should be watched even more closely by investors than these larger national trends. Millennials and older baby boomers are key groups to watch in your city. Millennials in particular are in their prime renting years, as we mentioned. So try to figure out what areas are increasing in appeal for them. If you're a value investor trying to buy into a neighborhood before it gentrifies, look for neighborhoods that the hipsters and the poor artists are starting to move into, as they're usually the early adapters, the first ones to brave rough areas and start to turn them around. And as the neighborhood becomes a little safer and gains a reputation for being artsy and cool, the young professionals will move in, and that's when values and rents really explode. And eventually, in some cases, empty nesters will move in as well, and they'll bring even more money with them into the area. While I'm no expert on military communities, I do know that base realignment takes years, and if you can be among the first to find out what personnel changes are slated for the base or bases in your area, you may be able to buy or sell before the base changes fully enter the public consciousness, before people really start thinking about changing the way that they value homes in that area. And lastly, I can't stress enough the importance of using accurate math to predict potential return on investment before buying any rental properties. You need to include figures like vacancy rates, like ongoing repair costs, property management costs. Even if you're planning to manage the property yourself, you should be paying yourself for your time and factor it in as a true expense. On our website, actually just launched what we think is the coolest and smartest rental ROI calculator on the planet. It includes neighborhood demographic data, neighborhood values, trends, Zillow estimates of value and time, property tax data, and a whole lot more. It's free, so we recommend checking it out. But regardless, make sure that you use very complete math before buying into a rental property, because a lot of people just look at the mortgage versus the rent to look at cash flow, and that's just not a good way to determine what your return on investment is going to be from that property. With that, I will wrap it up. We do have time for a question or two. So let's see what questions are coming in here.
Well, Brian, thank you for sharing your time and experience with us. If we had to start out with one question, let's go with this one. What is the one piece of advice you would give landlords who are looking to grow their business as they move into the future?
The one piece of advice that I would give is to network with other investors and with property managers, contractors. An easy way to do that is by attending local real estate investing club meetings. There are a lot of directories of real estate investing clubs online, including on our site. And look for differentiators that you can do that other people aren't. I'll give you one example. There's a service called NPS, and I can't remember. I think it's Neighborhood Payment Services, but they collect renters' rent directly from their paychecks every 2 weeks instead of just hoping that the renter will actually pay the rent on time. So you can look for these ways of differentiating yourself and improving your ability to collect rent, lowering your vacancy rate, et cetera, because vacancy rates are really what kill your return on investment for rental properties.
Super. Well, thank you so much. Saving time with EasyLandlordForums.com can be a really powerful business tool for property managers. For our members, Ahern.com and EasyLandlordForums.com have partnered together to bring you a 10% discount on all products and orders when you visit www.ahern.com EasyLandlord. Don't forget that we will be giving away a 1-year subscription at the end of today's presentation, so you definitely want to stick around for that. Now we want to hear from you. Please take a moment to complete the poll that's going to pop up on your screen. We want to know, how many rental properties do you manage? We're going to give you guys a minute to fill that out. We just wanted to let everybody know that we're going to be putting that link that Brian mentioned is in the chat room. So if you look to the right-hand side of your screen in the GoToWebinar box, you will find that there. So it looks like kind of reflective of what we know about our ahern.com users. The vast majority of our audience is sitting in the 1 to 5 properties that they're managing, with a good deal of the rest kind of spread throughout the rest of our poll results there. We're looking like, Brian, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, Lisa just said we're getting some links.
Yeah, sorry, that was actually the incorrect link. I just sent just sent you the updated link.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
So for our audience, if you clicked on the first link that was listed in the chat, Brian just said they sent a corrected one. So click on the second one. So we have a question from our audience that says, I have a rental house. My mortgage is $3,200, but rent is $2,900 based on the rental market in the area. Is it worth keeping as a rental? Did we lose Brian?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry.
I just sent that link, but I think it just went out to you and the panelists.
Okay, we'll have Lisa. Did you hear my question? Do you want me to restate that?
Can you restate the question?
Sure. Question is, I have a rental house. My mortgage is $3,200, but I rent it for $2,900 based on the rental market in my area. Is it worth keeping as a rental?
No, it's not.
Very cut and dried.
Just sell it. As long as you can sell it and not lose your shirt
Right.
based on property values in your area. But that's a losing proposition, because you're not just losing that $300 a month in cash flow. You're also losing money when you have vacancies, when repairs come along. If you need to hire a property manager, you're going to lose money there. You've got taxes and insurance and all kinds of other expenses. So,
is there a margin that you would recommend our audience would need to stay in to keep it a winning proposition?
Well, it depends, because on higher value properties, you can have a narrower margin because the tenants tend to be easier on the property, the turnover rate tends to be less, and rents relative to values tend to go down a little bit for the higher end properties. Right. So it depends on low end versus high end. Most of my rental properties are on the lower end. I look for a 20 to 30% return on investment. But there's some work that goes into that. First of all, it takes a lot of time to find those properties, et cetera. But you really want to look at it in terms of return on investment rather than a margin. But as a rule of thumb, you want your rent to be at least $500 more than your mortgage if you had to use crude math here.
Super. Well, Brian, I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us today. What we will do is there are some more questions sort of trickling in, and we will forward those to you via email and maybe get with you about getting some answers out to our audience through either the email when we send the recording or on the ahern.com blog. Okay,
sounds great. And by the way, it looks like the link that you sent out to everyone was the original link, not the updated one. Here, let me just send you the correct link right now, if you can pass that along.
Super. Thank you so much.
Kristen, thank you so much for having me.
Next up, we are welcoming Brooke Goldberg. Brooke is the Deputy Director of Government Relations for the National Military Family Association. She conducts research, monitors issues, and performs outreach and advocacy for military families. In addition to her time as both an active duty and reserve spouse, Brooke is a member of the Department of Defense Spouse Ambassador Network, the Department of Defense Financial Readiness Campaign, and serves on the Military Saves Advisory Committee. Brooke, welcome. Thank you for taking the time this afternoon to join us.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
We are so glad to have you. I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to you, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Okay, great. So real quick, I'll just go over what we do here at National Military Family Association. We are primarily an advocacy service, a nonprofit advocacy service, but we also do education and outreach to educate military families on different things. And we stay current on the needs of those military families through a whole kind of armada of volunteers that we have across the country and around the globe. the interaction we have via social media and phone calls, email, all of those things. And then we represent military families in our interactions with DoD, with Congress. I sit on some of the groups that you named earlier. Other executive agencies like the Department of Labor, the Department of Education, the Office of Personnel Management, non-governmental entities, and then state governments as well when laws and policies come up that are on the state level that we feel need to be recognized or revised. And then we also provide information to military families. So one of the things that basically in the military housing market that's important to recognize is the demographic that you're working with. And Brian talked a little bit about millennials, and certainly that comes into play a lot in the military because the military population doesn't look like the population at large. Most of the people in the military are under the age of 40 or 45 at the most. So more than half of military families are married, more than a third of them have children, and most of them are under the age of 35. So even the DoD has kind of spent some time trying to figure out how to reach out to that particular demographic. It's a digitally native demographic, people who have grown up with technology, are very comfortable with technology, and they've actually used a term to describe them, and that term is military-ennials. So the important part of, one, getting the information out to that demographic on renting properties is certainly access to digital technology. They do lots of their transactions online, whether it's banking, finding their news, watching TV. All of the interactions primarily are based around their online presence. And so it's very important for landlords and property managers to be able to interact with the military family members online. And especially in preparation for a PCS, they're going to be accessing information, looking for housing online. Are you posting pictures on there? Do you have contracts available, applications available? Can they contact you primarily online and potentially rent a house or a property without actually ever stepping foot in it? Those are really important. They use Facebook, Craigslist. Word of mouth means a lot. So it's important to be able to outreach to families in the digital world that they live in. The other thing that's really critical is kind of the way military housing works. There's been a movement since 1996 to privatize military housing on installations, and that occurred in large part because the military, the services were not able to modernize and maintain property at the rate that they needed to compete with the civilian market. And the civilian market couldn't offer sufficient housing. So a change really needed to be made. That's how privatization came about. And one of the really critical things for military families, obviously, who are moving frequently, who have deployments, training, there's a lot of unpredictability in the lifestyle of a military family. So being able to have a secure home environment, one that's safe, one that doesn't cause any health issues, one that is close and dependable, and where when things go wrong, they can get them fixed quickly. Those are all really, really important elements to military families. They want dependability in the provision of utilities, repair, security. I'm sure you'll hear from the military spouse panel about Murphy's Law among military spouses. It's the Murphy's Law of deployments. As soon as the service member goes away, the washing machine breaks or the car breaks down, you need to buy a new refrigerator. A million things happen. Having someone to be timely in their response to that is a big benefit to a military family. Having the security of knowing that you have a landlord or a property manager who can assist you when you are short-handed is really, really critical. So you can really sell yourself word of mouth, your property, by being attentive to those families, especially when the service member is deployed or away on training. For the legislative portion of things, I'll go over quickly for those of you who are, I'm pretty sure almost all of the listeners here on the panel today are aware of what the BAH is. BAH stands for Basic Allowance for Housing. It's an allowance that every service member receives, and outside of their normal base pay. And it is set by the Pentagon based on a number of factors in the market where that person is assigned. So it's based on zip code, and it takes into account utility costs, the rental market. It's adjusted regularly, and there is a proposal to find some savings from lowering the BAH next year in the fiscal year 15 National Defense Authorization Act. So they want to reduce it by 5%. They will be no longer calculating rental insurance into the calculation. That accounts for roughly 1% of the calculation. But what they would like to do is require service members to pay up to 5% of their housing costs out of their own pocket. The proposal so far from the Pentagon has failed in the House of Representatives. They passed the NDAA without that provision. But the Senate has not voted on it yet. They don't have it. They are, so far it is in their markup, but they have not yet voted on it. So there's still room on that one to try and make some changes. But the 5% reduction is calculated by pay grade. So for each pay grade, the average BAH across the country, which can vary vastly. The BAH for an E5 with dependents would range from anywhere from $840 a month on the low end to $3,700 a month on the high end. And the Department of Defense has proposed taking an average of the amount for each pay grade and then basing the 5% on that average. And it would be phased in over 3 years. So for instance, if this is passed next year, an E5 with dependents would pay $41 a month out of pocket. And in 2016, that would go up to $82 a month. In 2017, we would see the full reduction at $102 a month. On the officer side of things, an O3 with dependents would see similar changes over that three-year period. And of course, it would be slightly higher. So in 2017, instead of 102 out of pocket, the average would be 132 out of pocket. So if the Senate doesn't pass the National Defense Authorization Act with the proposal to cut BAH in it, then the calculations would remain the same. If they pass it with the cut, then the two versions that have been passed by the House and the Senate will have to go into conference and be agreed upon. So at this time, if you wanted to persuade your congressman or your legislator as to what they should decide, you would want to contact your senator. Once the NDAA is passed, if the provision is included in the Senate vote, you'll want to contact your members of Congress in both chambers because they will be coming to conference to reconcile the differences. Some other things just to note about legislation. The House tends to be very military friendly, so they, at least they are this year. So this year they have asked for a report on how the BAH is calculated and how it affects the long-term morale and readiness and retention of the military. The Senate, on the other hand, has asked for a report on the feasibility and advisability of longer tour lengths. So making PCSs kind of longer terms in between permanent change of stations, which would mean you would have renters for a longer period of time. People would not move as often if they lengthen tours. That would also result in a cost reduction to the Department of Defense. And then there's an amendment on entering into contracts for installation commanders. I've done a little bit more research on that to find out exactly what that means. At this point, the intent doesn't seem to be to do anything with housing off the installation. It has more to do with just facilitating access to utilities and things like that at once families get to a new location. So a lot of people have been talking about the force reduction estimates. I've prepared a slide here with the force reduction estimates for the next year. And there are certainly lots of service members who are concerned about job loss. I don't know how really that would affect housing markets, because a lot of it would depend on when people leave their service, if they decide to stay in the same location or not. You know, there's some concern that they're not getting very much notice. Like, they're supposed to get at least a year. 6 months is the bare minimum, and so that could impact the kinds of decisions they make after they get out. I have been asked about waterfall clauses, which there are several bases, actually quite a handful of installations where the privatized housing contractors have opened up housing to civilians, which they are permitted to do under the contracts that they have. All of the contracts for privatized housing have waterfall clauses that allow the developer to rent to civilians after they have reached out to a certain kind of hierarchy of possible renters and lessees, depending on what their occupancy rates are. So if their occupancy rate falls below a certain level, then they can reach out to non-active duty members, retirees, civilian contractors, civil service, and then civilians. And the civilians are put through a security check of their own, have to meet certain income standards, and then are permitted to lease some of the housing on base. Once they reach a certain occupancy level, then they stop advertising to civilians. And so far, I think the jury is still out on whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. Certainly my concern about it is why family members are not bringing occupancy levels up on the installation. Some of what we hear is that if the privatized contractor is not, again, like I mentioned earlier, attending to the service members' requests for maintenance and things like that, that then service members and families want to move off the installation because maybe they can get better options for their BAH rate off of the installation. So having attentive property management is important to them. But there are other factors, too, that determine whether or not a family wants to live on the installation or off. And that can be the convenience of the location, what kind of amenities are available on the installation versus off the installation, how is the school district near the installation, what are the employment opportunities for the spouse, and what is the availability of competitive housing outside the gate. All of those are really critical in determining as a military family where you're going to live. So those can all impact things on base and off base. And sequestration certainly could be driving certain decisions as well, because that can affect the amenities that are available on base. If prior to sequestration you had a swimming pool and a library and all those things available, and then now the hours have been reduced and access to the services has been reduced, that makes a big difference. So overall, I think the DoD changes and any recent changes in policy, for the most part, are I don't see anything that I think would make a big, huge impact in the rental markets. I think at this, but I'm not an economist, so, but I think there are things to keep in mind. But I'm ready for questions if anybody has any questions.
Absolutely. We do have a couple of questions for you, Brooke. One was we had a question about what is Operation Purple program?
Oh, Operation Purple that's a good question. I like that question. Operation Purple is a camp that actually we have 3 camp programs that fall under our Operation Purple program. One are camps for children of service members who have been deployed recently. One is a family retreat that helps facilitate family reintegration after deployment, and one is called Healing Adventures, that's for families of wounded warriors. And we have those throughout the year, and you can apply for them on our website.
Super. We have a couple other questions for you. One is, what are the special considerations in renting to military? Would you think it would be best to do month-to-month instead of 12-month leases due to deployment, reassignment, etc.?
I think that certainly month-to-month is easier for military families because the unpredictability with which orders arrive can be surprising. And so, however, military families are covered by law that if they receive orders, the law protects them and allows them to get out of their lease. So really, I think as the landlord or the property manager, you have to just be prepared that your lease may be broken and you will not be able to recoup, even if it's a year-long lease. If they get orders at 9 months out, they're protected by law. So
more an understanding of the law that has to do with orders and their ability to get out of them, you feel?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So that would be an important consideration. You know, I think military families are a lot like other families, except for that they have I suppose there's more predictability in income and kind of the lifestyle that the military family is going to face and be dealing with. But aside from the flexibility on the lease part, I don't think there's too much to worry about.
One last question that we had is an audience member asked, I require my tenants, because of the risk of scams, to meet with the landlord. So he requires meeting the tenants. How do you balance that when you are dealing with military personnel? I'm assuming he's speaking to the fact that so many military personnel search for their home long distance.
That's a tough one. You know, I know some military families who, because we as military families move around so much, who have had friends represent them in meeting the landlord or seeing a place in person, and that certainly is a great opportunity if you offer that up to a tenant and say, do you know someone locally who can come and meet with me and look at the place for you? But for many military families, going ahead of their order date to look at a place is not realistic. For some of them, it is. Right. But being flexible is a real bonus to military families in getting those tenants in there.
Super. Well, Brooke, I want to take a moment and thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to stay with us and talk to us about the situation going on and what National Military Family Association is doing. If we have any further questions, then we will direct them to you and invite you to address them maybe on the blog on ahern.com.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So now let's hear what you, the audience, have to say. We have another poll question for you. What we want to know is, what is the #1 issue that you face in your business? And if we'll give you a moment to answer that for us, and then we'll move on to our military spouse panel. Now we're going to plug you directly into the situation on the ground for each of our military branches. We have a powerhouse panel of 6 military spouses, each of whom are active advocates for their community. We have asked each panelist to give you a brief overview of the challenges facing their community, and then we'll have some Q&A featuring your questions that have been submitted via the chat box. We're going to start our military spouse panel with Army spouse Amy Bouchatz. Amy is the managing editor of military.com's spouse and family blog, spousebuzz.com, and an associate editor of military.com. Amy oversees, writes, and edits content for SpouseBuzz, as well as working with the blog's many guest contributors. An Army wife and mother of two, Amy has been featured as a military family subject matter expert on NPR and in the New York Times. Amy, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. Well, like Kristen said, I'm an Army wife. I'm also a journalist, so I cover the Army and I cover the rest of the DoD as well. I've been asked today to give you a little snapshot of the Army situation, our personnel situation, and our housing situation. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So the Army has about 520,000 soldiers. Just over 70,000 of those are female. So that's a lot of males and not very many females. In the Army, we have one officer for every 4.5 enlisted members. Of course, the difference between an officer and enlisted as far as the day-to-day sort of thing goes is the job, but also pay, as far as it matters to property managers and landlords. The majority of enlistees are young. They're under 25. The average age of an enlisted soldier is, however, 28, and the average age of an officer is 35. Well over 50% of these soldiers are married, so that means they come with families and they're looking for family housing. But that's much, much less likely to be true of female soldiers. Over 60% of soldiers have children, so that means that these are people who are looking for really great schools and for housing near great schools. So what's happening in the Army? We have downsizing. We are going to be dropping from 520,000 to 490,000 by October 2015, and there is the possibility that we're going to be dropping even farther over the next year. So people are getting pushed out of the Army, whether they like it or not, through pink slips and denied reenlistments. That means that people are going to be moving from their duty station, probably back home, and leaving that beautiful housing that they are in right now. You know, for the people who are still in the Army, most soldiers continue to PCS, permanent change of station, every 2 to 3 years. So housing at the most populated posts, on post, tends to be very popular and very hard to come by, which is why living in the community is often a very attractive option. I can tell you when we moved here to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where I'm speaking to you from today, there was a 9-month waiting list to get on-base housing. We didn't even put our names on the list. We went straight into the community and looked for housing there. So that's a little snapshot of the Army and what sort of situation that we're facing.
Thank you, Amy. We'll be back with you in a moment to ask you some questions. Next, we have Navy spouse Amanda Crow. Amanda is the Executive Director of In Gear Career, a nonprofit dedicated to facilitating networking connections for military spouse professionals. A Navy veteran herself, her passion for working with military families has now turned into a full-time job serving career-minded military spouses. Welcome, Amanda. I think you're muted still.
Sorry about that. Thanks for having me. So I'll give you, like Amy did, just a quick snapshot for the Navy. And our breakdown looks like this. We have about 323,000, just over, active duty members and 107,000 reservists. As the Army, we're predominantly male in service, and you can see the percentages broken down there for both officers and enlisted. The Ready Reserve also is 80% male and only 20% women, and then we have some of the inactive reserve there as well, the numbers there for you. The trends happening in the Navy tend to be, we run on a kind of 3-year enlistment for most sets of orders, but that can vary depending on your job in the Navy. And as Brooke mentioned earlier, force-wide, it's the same in the Navy. Occasionally, those orders can be very unpredictable and come at any time, and certainly deployment orders are the same. Reduction in force for the Navy is expected to be pretty tiny this year. 300 sailors, and they're decommissioning, I think, 5 ships. So we're not expected to see huge decreases right now. The potential for the BAH decrease that Brooke mentioned would affect us just as the same as any other branch. And they've also talked about increase in prices for TRICARE coverage, especially for family members, and that would affect us the same and obviously cut into the family budget. That's about it for the Navy.
Thank you, Amanda. Joining us next is Air Force spouse Adriana Domingos-Lufer. Please tell me I pronounced your name correctly. She co-founded Military Spouse Bloggers and has created for herself a full-time job serving career-minded military spouses while PCSing 3 times and as an absentee landlord. Girlfriend, you make me tired just reading that. Welcome, Adriana.
Thank you for having me. I want to go ahead and a lot of what I'm going to say, once again, thank you for having me, is going to echo the fellow military spouses who've already presented ahead, Amy and Amanda. So the Air Force breaks down as 326,259 active duty members, and it's an 80-20 split between the enlisted and officer force. As you can see, the age distribution is very similar to what Amy presented with the Army demographics. 35 is the average age of the officer force, 29 being the average age of the enlisted force, and 58% of active duty service members are married. As far as issues that are impacting the Air Force, something to consider when it comes to the tempo of assignments for Air Force families is knowing that approximately 1/5 of us are overseas at any given time. And those assignments have a tendency to be around 3 years in length. And when we're coming back, I know I can speak from my experience when I was coming back from England for our first assignment. We were looking for something big. We had lived small for quite some time, and we were excited to get back to American standard housing. Our stateside assignments have a tendency to also be around the 3 to 4 year length, 3 year being much more common. With junior officers and some junior enlisted, they're able to stay up to 4 years. I'm actually coming up on my 4th year at MacDill Air Force Base in the Tampa area, and that's just because my spouse is PCS without us to South Korea. So those are also, I have to echo what Brooke said, the idea of having very responsive landlords is huge when we're kind of doing solo ops here as military families. As far as the RIF goes, I don't want to de-emphasize the fact that the RIF is going to affect, or the reduction in forces is going to affect the Air Force significantly, but we have also been experiencing a reduction in force over the past, on and off over the past 10 years. So this is something that is commonplace for our forces right now. And I am neither an economist nor someone who can project what the real estate market is going to look like, but I would assume that if BAH rates are cut by 5%, more and more families may be looking to occupy on-base housing if it's available to stretch their dollar further. But a lot of the information I just have to echo. So that's what I've got for the Air Force. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adriana. Next up, we have Marine Corps spouse Christine Schellhaus. Christine founded USMC Life in 2009 as a way to help inspire, connect, and educate Marine Corps families. As a public speaker, she created the Live, Laugh, Learn military seminars and speaks regularly about her experiences as a Marine spouse for Operation Homefront, changes of perspective for families in military culture, and recovery from loss. Christine, the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me. I just wanted to reiterate how amazing all the spouses before me. They're really respected in their community, and it says a lot about AHERN that all of us have joined on to talk about our community because we're so passionate about it. Can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So the Marine Corps is experiencing a huge cut of both officers and enlisted. A lot of people are taking early retirement packages even if they're not being offered the pink slip. So what's happening is that people are scared, and a lot of people are just deciding to take their chances out in the civilian sector. Some may choose to stay in the local area, or some may go back home or wherever the jobs are available. If you look, you can see that our enlisted to officer ratio is quite different. The people that are married inside the Corps, officers tend to be married a lot higher than the enlisted. We do a lot of deployments. The men and women that are Marines, they leave quite often, and when they're not leaving, they're training. So like some of the others have mentioned, getting the house fixed and having repairs available in a very quick time is really important to us. We're also very male-centric. We have very few females in the Corps, and you can see also that our age grade is very young, between the years of 18 to 30. So basically, it's a hard time in the Corps right now, and a lot of people are just not exactly sure what's going on. So my slide's not working to the next one, please. Sorry to have to do that. My keyboard's not working. So we are, again, like I said, with the drawdown of the Corps, we're about 220,000 right now, but we are going all the way down to 174. That number has not been 100% identified, but you can see that it's a significant loss of 46,000. They have already started shutting down bases, not bases, but certain units within the bases. We felt that here at Pendleton, 29 Palms, and Lejeune. We've also been receiving, a lot of people are trying to get 3-year tours of Dirty instead of shorter tours, which can sometimes be a year or 2 years. Quantico tends to be a more transient base with 1-year orders, but now that is shifting, and they're asking people to move to the Pentagon or do other duty stations that are around the Washington, D.C. area without actually moving on. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Christine. Next, Shelly Kimball is a Coast Guard spouse, an Army sister, and an Air Force daughter. She was selected as the 2013 AFI Coast Guard Spouse of the Year and is especially passionate about military spouse hiring and military children's issues. Shelly gave up a tenure-track teaching position to move with her family to their duty station in Miami a few years ago and has a doctorate in mass communication with a specialization in media law. Shelly, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate all of us being able to talk about our lives as military spouses. This is especially dear to my heart as we just PCS'd, and if you could see beyond my screen, you'd see a sea of boxes that I have yet to unpack. But this is the norm for all of us. As you see here at Coast Guard by the numbers, we're a very small service branch, but I like to say we're mighty. Often we are not part of the DoD figures that you'll see because we are housed under the Department of Homeland Security, but we do function similarly to the other branches. As you can see, the numbers are very similar to those that you have seen the other presenters talk about. One thing I'd like to explain about Coast Guard is that we are divided into 9 districts around the country, and within those districts it includes Alaska, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and Guam. Not only do our numbers seem to match up with the other branches, but I think our issues of concern do as well. We are also looking at drawdown, and if you could advance the next slide, please. We are looking at drawdown as well, but our branch has not given figures for how many it will involve. We have several ways that we will be pulling back on active duty service members. We're calling it involuntary separation, which is a nice way to say pink slips. The first one is higher tenure for enlisted. That happens when an enlisted member stays at a certain rate for too long. They're then asked to leave, and it's because the retention rate in the Coast Guard is high, 94%, so people tend to stay. The Coast Guard just announced recently the offer of temporary early retirement, and that will be available to anyone with 15 years or more. And the Career Retention Screening Panel, which is a panel that gets together to look at active duty service members to see if they will be continued. If they are chosen not to be continued, then they are asked to leave. And so when you put this all together, that means a good number of coasties who will be looking for permanent places to live rather than our transient lifestyle. Housing is a huge issue right now. And one thing that's consistent with Coast Guard families is that our BAH is really difficult for us because we don't necessarily live near military installations, we live in coastal communities, and so those seaside seasonal communities can be very expensive for us. And so we tend to pay out of pocket for BAH because we can't manage within what BAH thinks it should cost us. Some places get what we call COLA, which is a cost of living allowance. It's rare, but it's helpful. But those numbers we are hearing, like our DoD friends, are also dropping. And if you spoke to a Coastie today and said, what is your greatest issue before you with housing, they would probably talk to you about mandatory housing. This year, within the United States, we are all required to apply for housing, military housing, whether or not we want to live there. There are too many houses, not enough of us filling them, and the Coast Guard can't afford for both BAH, COLA, and empty houses, and so they are mandating that we move into military housing when it's available. They're also what they're calling right-sizing the inventory, which means that they will be selling off housing and then pulling in more for those areas that need more housing for our families. 3 areas that are going to get more housing, or that they're focusing on getting more, are Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico. Additionally, we've also heard fewer PCSs, fewer moves. We just got a new commandant this summer, and one of the key things that he said that he would like to get started is having us stay longer in our duty stations than our 2-3 year average. And so I think the effects on the housing market may be more buying if you're staying longer. But for all of us as Coasties, I think the #1 need we have is affordable housing in our communities that we can manage with our BAH without having to pay out of pocket.
Thank you so much, Shelley. We'll be back to speak with you in just a few moments when we have some questions from the audience. Rounding out our spouse panel today, we have National Guard spouse Kimberly Suchek. She is the author of Operation Military Resources, a book of over 1,500 resources for all branches of the military and their families. She is also a weekly column writer for Stars and Stripes, a speaker and freelance writer for various other magazines, blogs, and newspapers. Kim, welcome. Kim, I think you need to unmute yourself. We can't hear you yet. There you are.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and it's an honor to be on here with you other panelists. You're all very informative and a great resource for our military community. I have obviously the biggest chart here, so I'm just going to kind of skip through it real fast and basically just state that as you can see with the other panelists, that we have a higher enlistment percentage and marriage percentage and male percentage in the Guard and Reserve aspect. Age has begun to differ, changing with the Vietnam soldiers and them being, forced out and starting to retire. So you're kind of seeing the age demographic kind of changing a bit. With the downsizing happening, we have really begun to see that a lot within our community. The Guard and Reserve was strong at 570,000, and as of September of this year, it's dropped down to 510,000 and expected to even be less than that by 2015. Also, as Christine was stating, units have also been started to be eliminated within the Guard and Reserve as they're taking soldiers and making them go into other areas and into other units. One of the big things, I guess, a lot of people try to wonder is the PCSing, and we don't really see that in the Guard and Reserve so much. But one thing I would like the landlords to be aware of is that with the consistent deployments that the Guard and Reserve families have had to face over the last, 5 to 10 years, a lot of these soldiers, their outside civilian jobs are being put on hold, and when they're activated and put into military, on Title 10 orders, their pay grade, their pay income that the families are used to having drop considerably. A lot of people, are under that myth that when you're activated, you make more money. Well, in the Guard and Reserve capacity, that is not necessarily true. So there is a lot of hardships that the Guard and Reserve families face when they're, looking at deployments consistently. Over in, many of them, my husband included, just in the last couple of years, is deployed 3-4 times. So a lot of the civilian world is not aware of that. So there's a lot of time, a lot of hardships that come into that. I guess to just kind of be aware of. Just to be aware of that, I guess really that's about it. I know that a lot of people are not aware of the how the wording now. I have it on here with ready reserve and selects reserve. So if anybody has any questions on that, just to save time here, if you'd like to send me emails, questions about that, I'd be happy to break that down more. Otherwise, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kimberly. We have quite a few questions that have popped up as throughout y'all's conversation that we'd like to address to you. And so we'll start, we're going to head back to Amy. And if you guys want to turn on your webcams, you're welcome to. Amy, a question that we received is, if the Army is downsizing, why do you feel that their housing is getting harder to come by? Have you gotten any impression on that?
I wouldn't say it's gotten harder to come by. The downsizing has really just begun. Within, even the last 6 months or so. So it's really too soon to tell how the housing on base will be impacted by that. I would guess logically that there would be more of it, but as it stands right now, it is still very difficult to get housing on a military base in a larger military town.
Super, thank you so much. Adriana, here's a question for you. Considering the demographics of military tenants, what would you say is a typical size in terms of square feet or bedrooms that you would see as being most in demand? Adriana?
Sorry, I was muted and talking to myself.
Gotcha.
I think that's a tough one, so I'm going to answer it from a personal perspective. I'm thinking, based on the houses that I've lived in, and I've ranged from anywhere between 1,000 square feet for 4 people to our current largest house, which is right under 1,800 square feet. I would say that somewhere in the arena of 1,500 square feet is probably livable for a family of 4. I think ideally, a little bit larger always helps. But I think we're all accustomed to the constant ebb and flow of the sizes of our house, and our furniture and the way we live our life is meant to either expand or contract based on available square footage. But I would say a great guideline, 1,500 square feet, is kind of like the sweet spot for comfortable living. Would you all agree? Okay, yeah. Cool.
Generally. Okay, well, let's switch over to Amanda, and here's a question for you. In your experience, what are you seeing as far as the timeline and how much notice military personnel are getting for their PCSs?
Honestly, I work with spouses from all branches, and I think that it is wildly different based on every family. So I'd like to tell you that we have a ton of notice. What usually happens is, at least amongst those that I talk to regularly, is a ton of speculation. So like Adriana said, she's coming up on our 4th year. My husband and I were supposed to be in Tampa for 3, but we're about to close out 2, and there's discussions about early move for us. So we've been speculating on it for a long time, but I think a lot of the military spouses I talk to in particular tend to hold the idea that we certainly wish our service members would just stop talking about it, because it always seems to change a million times between when the speculation starts and when the orders are actually issued. So I hesitate to really put anything on it, because I can tell you that we can start speculating anywhere from 3 to 6 months out, just because we know what the patterns typically are, but by no means do we have any kind of concrete information that we can share with a landlord at that stage. And I'm a landlord myself, so I actually empathize with that. I'm not just saying it to give us an out. We wish we had more concrete notice than we do, but it usually, I think last time my husband and I PCS'd, again, we'd been talking about it for months. But we're never sure exactly what date. We ended up moving an entire month earlier than we expected, and we ended up moving to a different location than when we first started discussing it. So lots of things can change in that period.
Super, thank you so much. Christine, here's a question for you. what recommendations would you have for landlords as they're trying to attract and work with military tenants?
I would definitely say that digital is extremely important. You need to have lots of pictures online. We are comparing and contrasting every house, every community, every apartment, and we're also asking for recommendations from friends. We just PCS'd Quantico a year ago, and now we're already back at Camp Pendleton, which was pretty rare. Like I mentioned before, most people want to stay on the East Coast or West Coast, depending. One of the landlords would not rent us a house because we were only on your orders, and I think if you do that, you're not only, I believe it's illegal, but you're also doing yourself a disservice because 95% of the people that we went to class with ended up staying. So you could potentially miss out on a really good renter. I guess the second part of it is be flexible and answer people's email quickly, because a lot of us are really quick about pulling the trigger when we find something we like, and you can miss out on a really good tenant.
Absolutely. So, Shelley, here's a question for you. When you, and in general, the people that you speak to, when you are looking at homes, are you researching property managers and landlords? Are you looking for certain qualities? Is that a consideration when you're deciding on a home?
Absolutely. I think that if we're renting homes, we want to make sure that we're happy with the people from whom we're renting. And I know that within the Coast Guard community, we are incredibly close-knit. I always say it's like 2 degrees of separation between coasties. And that means that if you're renting to a military family and you're a great property manager, landlord, you're going to get the word of mouth from all of us. We're going to talk you up. We're going to put it on Facebook. We'll tell our friends. And I have known so many homes in so many areas that go from coastie to coastie to coastie to coastie, because if we're happy there, we welcome each other in and give each other the gouge. Oh, this is a great property manager. This is a great real estate agent. And I would think it's true of the other branches. Word of mouth is gold among us because we trust each other and we're all living the same life.
And is there a specific way that a landlord would grab that word of mouth? So how should they be tracking it? Is there a specific way that they, can empower their tenants to spread the word?
I think that within the Coast Guard community, there's a really great example there's a website and Facebook page called Coasties on the Move. And so we're very digital, as Christine mentioned, and so we spread the word over social media amongst ourselves. And so I know that on some of those real estate pages devoted to military families, that's where we're spreading the word. And so we would welcome in, and we do in the Coast Guard community, welcome in real estate professionals to join in the conversation and be there with us and talk to us about what they have, what they're showing, what they're looking for, and we can keep that conversation going and say what we need and what we're looking for as well.
Absolutely. Well, I am going to take a moment to thank you ladies for joining us today. I would love to have you, if you have more to say about the conversation, then join us over on ahern.com on our blog, and if any of our audience have further questions for any of these ladies, then please direct it to us and we will see what we can do to get you answers. Thank you again for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure meeting all you ladies.
Thank you so much.
Okie doke, so now we are going to ask the audience to answer one more question for us. What we would like to know is, what are some changes that you would like to see on ahern.com? What can we do for you? So we're going to put a poll up again and give you a moment to answer that before we move on to our last speaker of the day, Brian Birdy. It looks like now we have some of the results from our poll. Easier listing management, tenant application, and screening are both important factors for both of you, or for most of you, along with syndicating listings to other sites for some one-stop marketing. So we're going to be taking that all into consideration, and next up, it's time to move on to our last speaker of the day. And I have to tell you, when we approached NARPM and asked them for a speaker recommendation, Brian Birdy was the immediate response. Brian has received his Residential Management Professional and Master Property Manager designations from NARPM and the Certified Property Manager designation from IREM. He is an approved property management instructor for both the state of Texas and NARPM. Brian, are you with us? Hello? I think we are. Brian, you might need to unmute yourself so we can hear you. Give us just one moment. We seem to be having a technical difficulty here getting Brian on the line. Give us just one moment to get this sorted out. While we're working on getting him organized and online, we are going to share with you some of the resources that we are working on to bring to our ahern.com members. We are working to build relationships with partners that bring more power to your rental property marketing. And some of our recommended resources include easylandlordforms.com. This is the premier landlord forms website available. They specialize in state-specific lease agreements and have a huge library of forms available. Everything a landlord could possibly need in one place. We also recommend floorplanonline.com. Floorplan Online helps real estate experts sell properties nationwide. They photograph and measure real estate and create cool websites with video, floor plans, and photos. And if you need help with your marketing services, we recommend that you tap into a subject matter expert to help your marketing to the military community by hiring veterans and military spouses. It looks like we've got Brian back on the line.
Can you hear me?
There you are.
I'm here.
Okay, we're going to get your slide up and ready to go, and I'm going to turn the stage over to you.
All right, if we could start on the next slide there. Okay, well, this has been a great webinar. Thanks for letting me be part of this. You know, Birdy Properties has been managing rental properties for military members and renting out to military members for over 35 years. We started in 1979. My dad was a Chief Master Sergeant in the Air Force stationed at Randolph Air Force Base and decided to look into real estate as a possible second career for him. And most of his friends could not sell their houses because back in '79 interest rates were about 18 to 20%, and many people had to rent them out. I served 15 years in the Air Force myself, so for most of my adult life and all my child life, I've been either in the military or a dependent and have moved all over the world and know all that we've heard about up till now as issues that we have to deal with. San Antonio is a military town, so we focus on military members. I took over this company in 2004, and we have grown from managing about 100 doors to well over 1,400 doors, and we've grown to a 3-generation family business because all of my children have gone off to college and are now back here working with me at this company. So some of the top things that a property manager and company can do, if we can go to the next slide, is that we can attract military members. The number one thing you can do to attract military members is to make sure that you have your lease approved by the base housing office, and make sure that you include a military clause. You know, here in San Antonio, we've pretty much had a great relationship with all of the base housing offices, and used to have to regularly visit them before we got Ahern as a online option for us. One of the other things, if you've listened to today, you can hear that the millennials are the makeup of the military. And so having a great website is extremely important because that's where those military tenants are going to find you. They're going to look well in advance of them being within your city. You know, putting signs in front of houses is less important today on rental homes. It's much more important that a person can find you, your company, and your house online. Military owners who are looking to rent out their homes, they start online. They start thinking whether they want to do it themselves or whether they want to find a professional property manager, and they're going to find you if you're online, have a great website, and can be found easily. Another important thing is to advertise everywhere you possibly can to reach out, but when you're really looking to military members, AHRN is the place to be. I've been with them since they existed. San Antonio was one of the test cities. I was one of the original people that they trained and used, and I thought it was the best thing they could do because I used to drive to every base housing office in San Antonio and make sure my houses were in their big book that people could look at, and this was a way for us to do this and reach those military members before they even got here. Military tenants will look for homes on AHRN, and military owners will look there as well to see what their house might rent for and find possible property managers. You really have to optimize your listings to attract those military tenants. Photos are extremely important. I learned that years ago and have always made sure that we have as many photos as we possibly can and good, useful photos, not just pictures. You know, they need to show and walk a person through the house, inside and outside, backyard, so that they can see what it is. We've moved to video. Video is extremely important because it lets them basically walk through the home without being here. And then, of course, a great write-up telling them everything they need to know about the house because most of that shopping is done online before they leave their current station and head to where you're advertising your home. And the last thing, which I know Brooke mentioned earlier, is that streamlining and automating of all processes. And we've gone completely digital on everything. If anyone wants to apply for a home, they do it online. This millennial, and the military is full of millennials, they want it now, they want it electronically, and that's the first thing they look for. So our entire application process, our lease signing process, pretty much all of our communication is all done electronically. Everybody pays their rent electronically. It allows us the ability to have quicker responses to our owners and to resolve issues for tenants by making sure you have really good automated systems. The one thing you want to do is get that word of mouth. You've heard a lot of people talking about the word of mouth. I think our next slide has some demographics about that. You know, even credibility and profitability, they still today, Americans believe that a face-to-face, voice-to-voice, word of mouth is the most credible thing. Nothing beats someone telling them that this is a person you should rent from, this is a house worth living in, this is an area you want to be at. Nothing beats mouth-to-mouth or word of mouth, and the strongest form of that is within the military itself. They talk to each other. They talk with their friends. People have traveled all over. They know people where they're moving to or where they've moved from, and so that communication always happens. Some other things you want to consider on the next slide, if you're looking at trying to have that word of mouth, is to have great service. I mean, if that word of mouth works both ways. If you are not catering to and taking care of the military members as best you can, and of course, being a military family, you know, we've always catered to the military. I mean, I know what they're going through when they're moving here or when they're leaving, PCSing, whether they're here for school or whether they've been here for years. And when you can provide great service for them, that gets around at the next base they go to. And that adds up over the years. We've been doing this 35 years, and we've got great word-of-mouth referrals all over. But you're going to be managing homes for military owners in one way. They know the other military members that are leaving the town that you're in. And, you know, we try to give incentives to our owners if they can refer new clients to us. I mean, if they like us, why wouldn't they want to tell their friends to bring their rental property to us as well? One of the best things you can do is to tell your story, especially if you have military ties. We make sure people understand military like to work with military. There's a connection, there's a bond, we know that. It doesn't even matter which military. When you can say, I served in, then you automatically have something in common. Other ways you can find to attract the military community is to continue to stay involved, to volunteer in events and things that the military need volunteers for, participate in Fisher House and Wounded Warrior fundraising events. We do that here in San Antonio all the time, and maybe attend local military conferences and be able to see and learn a little bit more about what the needs are. And then on the last slide is how is the best way to grow your business? I mean, people ask me all the time, how have you been able to grow from 100 doors to one of the largest in San Antonio? And I tell people it's very simple. You have to keep your current clients. You know, the clients that you have, if you're bringing in one and you're losing two because you're not doing a good job, you cannot grow your business. Communication is the key to that. You have to let people know what's going on. And today, communication is so easy between emails and text messages and Facebook and everything else. I mean, if you can't communicate with your owner, I still find it surprising at times that I have owners I can't reach. But it isn't that they can't reach me or they're not hearing from us. It's that generally it's that we can't reach them for some reason. You got to deliver on your promises. When you tell people this is what you're going to do, when they hand you probably the largest investment that they own and leave it with you to take care of it, and you promise things, you must deliver on them. And things can go wrong. Things can get screwed up. You just got to step up and claim it and make it right. And a lot of times the things that go wrong aren't your fault, but you are the solution. You're the person here. They're across the world somewhere, and they are concerned about their property, and you have to be the answer to that and be there. The three biggest reasons why owners leave and stop working with a property manager, the number one thing is you don't communicate well enough with them. You've got to let them know what's going on. We preach it all the time here. In our business, we want to be Smokey the Bear and not the fireman. We want to tell everybody about the dangers and let them know what's going on, and we don't want to be putting out fires. You've got to communicate in advance with them. You cannot let them be surprised about a problem or a repair, because go back and see number one. If they're surprised, it's not going to work. And the most important thing, because that's what we're here for as property managers, and that's why they hired us, if you don't get their property rented, then they're not going to want to stick around and hang around with you. So I have some time for some questions. If there are any questions for me, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thanks, Brian. We have a couple of questions for you. One of our audience questions. I require a minimum of 1-year lease with the understanding that it may be broken by deployment. Does this requirement discourage tenants from viewing my property in the first place?
Those are the same requirements that we have. We have a 1-year minimum, and I never see it a discouragement, especially to the military members, because we make it clear that we have a military clause, and our history has proven that it's not a problem. If they sign a lease with us, but things change and they leave, we're prepared to react to that, and our owners understand that's part of it. I don't see it being a problem in my town at all. It's pretty much the standard in San Antonio.
Gotcha. Now, do you have any kind of bottom recommendations for people to use social media?
People tell me that you're supposed to use anything and everything you possibly can use. You know, though I have younger people in my company that are helping me be more online and more visible. So we have just about every page you can imagine, and we're out there. I don't know about all of them, but we make sure we update them. We advertise our listings that we have out there. We celebrate news out there. We just want to be visible, because the thing about it is you never know which of those sites is the one that's going to be attractive to you know, either one service or one group of individuals, and you just don't want to be missed. So you got to pretty much try to be everywhere you possibly can.
Absolutely. We have another audience question that asks, we currently have a website, but we only have an application that you can download and scan back in. What is the easiest way? Where should we go? Or how do we set up an online application on our website? Do you have a recommendation for them?
I do. There's a site called Property Manager Websites. PMW, and they can design a online application that works seamlessly. That's who we've used. They're based out of Atlanta, Georgia. They focus specifically on property managers, and they are a direct affiliate with NARPM. They really know their business, and they have the only approved Texas Association of Realtors application online system already set up, but they can take any app you have and automate the entire process, including the collection of the application fees, and really get you connected to a quick background and credit screening with a couple clicks of a button, and it allows you to get an answer back to that military member faster, and that's really, as you've heard from some of those wives, that's what they're looking for.
Absolutely.
Quick responses.
I know, you know, I can tell you, we've moved 7 times. I've been married for 8 years with my husband for 10, and we've moved 7 times. And you get to a point in that PCS process where it becomes an urgent need to find. You just need to know where you're going, and that the ability to have a landlord who responds back to you quickly is absolutely huge. Well, I want to take a moment and thank you, Brian, for spending the afternoon with us. We appreciate you bringing your expertise, and we appreciate NARPM for recommending you to us. And we hope that you will take some time in the next couple of weeks to visit, you know, our ahern.com blog and maybe answer some more of the questions from the audience that we weren't able to get to.
I will do. Thanks for inviting me and letting me be part of your program today.
Thank you, Brian. And now we want to say thank you to the audience for choosing to spend your very valuable time with us this afternoon. As a thank you, we are going to be pulling the names of 2 attendees to receive prizes from 2 of our favorite resources that we mentioned earlier today. While Rachel and Lisa are working their random generator magic, I'd like to share with you some things that are going on new at ahern.com. So let's see if we can get our video up and running for you.
Your listing is upgraded on Ahern. Your listing will be showcased at the top of the listing results page. Be featured. Need to get your property rented fast? Stand out from the crowd of listings with Listing Plus Upgrade. Every day your rental is empty is money wasted. By upgrading today, you'll keep money in your pocket. Here's what you get when you upgrade to Listing Plus. Reduce your work. Plus listings stay activated for 50% longer. Showcase your listing. For the first 14 days that your listing is upgraded on Ahern, your listing will be showcased at the top of the listing results page. Be featured. For the 45 days your listing is upgraded, your listing will stand out as featured and will remain above basic listings. Double your photo power. People love photos. The more you can show off your property, the more people can see if the home is a good fit for them. Price it right. The key to filling a vacancy fast is pricing. By upgrading, you'll have access to ahern.com's Rent Smart tool for easy, comparable market analysis. Don't miss out on potential renters because they missed your listing. Upgrade to Listing Plus today to get it rented fast. So what are you waiting for? Upgrade today.
What else is new at ahern.com? We have even more going on. We are about to launch a revamped design with social media login, placing your ahern.com listing at the social media fingertips of prospective tenants throughout the DoD community. In July, we launched the PCS Toolkit, from calculating entitlement estimates to putting together a PCS budget and listing important tasks to helping families choose the right home. The PCS Toolkit is specifically designed to assist military members at each critical stage of their PCS move. Currently in development, we're working on a business directory to connect your business with the military community. Keep an eye on your inboxes for more news to come. We'll be emailing you with a recording of today's webinar, as well as the slides and all of the links that are mentioned, and the resources that we've suggested that you utilize. We're also going to send you some discounts and resource links. We also wanted to let you know that this is the first of our webinars, and we want to know what you think. Was it helpful? What could we do better? What is it that you need help with that ahern.com can provide? And now it looks like we are going to be giving away some of these prizes. What we have for you today is a 1-year subscription to EasyLandlordForms.com, which we mentioned earlier today. Let's see if we've using our random generator from the attendees. Lisa, do we have a winner? Looks like our first winner is attendee Lisa Kimmy. And so Lisa, if you will, do we have her email, or do you want her to contact us? We will be emailing you the information for your prize, so congratulations. I know that that'll be a powerful tool for your business in the next year. Our second prize we have to give away today is a 1-year subscription to floorplanonline.com. You mentioned several of our panelists and also Brian Birdy, who commented how important it was to be able to give potential tenants an eye for, what they were looking at and how a home would fit them. Our second winner for the floorplanonline.com one-year subscription is Donna Bennett. So congratulations, Donna. We'll be emailing you with the information for your prize as well. Now we know that many of you in the audience are either current or former military, and we want to thank you for your service. And to all of our guests, we want to thank you for housing and supporting our armed forces and their families. Thank you again to all of our speakers today for sharing their expertise to help our members stay up to date on the rental market and changes within the DoD community. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again.